The night was unnervingly quiet, as though the world was holding its breath. I sat alone at the corner of an old, weathered bar on the outskirts of town. The amber light from the low-hanging fixtures cast everything in a dim glow, turning even the most mundane objects into distorted shadows. The bartender had gone to the back, leaving me with a glass of whiskey that tasted faintly of dust. I wasn't much of a drinker, but that night something drew me here. A restless feeling, like an itch beneath my skin. I was turning the glass absently in my hands when he appeared. I hadn't noticed him walk in. One moment I was alone, the next, he was beside me. Gaunt, with eyes sunken deep into his skull, he moved stiffly, like every motion was a deliberate act of will. His clothes hung off him, rumpled and faded, and he smelled faintly of mildew. "Did you hear them too?" he asked, his voice low and strained, like gravel grinding underfoot. I blinked, startled. "Hear what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and slid something across the counter. A photograph, its edges curled and yellowed with age. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The image was stark and eerie. A crooked wooden staircase, warped with age, descending into darkness. The steps were narrow and uneven, the kind of staircase that might buckle under your weight if you weren't careful. The railing was cracked and splintered, and the air in the photo seemed heavy, as though the shadows had a weight of their own. "It doesn't matter," the man said after a moment, standing abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet bar. "You'll hear them soon enough." He shuffled toward the door without another word, leaving me with the photo and an inexplicable sense of unease. I should have stayed at the bar. I should have ignored the photograph, left it there, and forgotten the strange man altogether. But as I stared at the staircase in the picture, something stirred in me, a morbid curiosity, a pull I couldn't resist. And so, an hour later, I found myself wandering the outskirts of town, guided by the vague directions the man had muttered before leaving. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, plunging the streets into darkness. The houses grew sparser, then disappeared altogether, replaced by overgrown fields and skeletal trees. Eventually, I reached it. The house stood alone, its silhouette jagged and foreboding against the night sky. The wood was rotting, the windows black and empty like soulless eyes. The staircase in the photograph was there, jutting out from the front porch and descending into the earth, half buried in overgrown grass and weeds. I should have turned back. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. The staircase called to me, and before I knew it, I was stepping onto the first creaking plank, the darkness below swallowing me whole. The staircase groaned beneath my weight, each step sending an unsettling creak reverberating through the stillness. I descended slowly, one hand gripping the railing, the other trailing the edge of my flashlight's beam over the surrounding shadows. The house above disappeared with surprising speed. The light from the porch faded into nothingness, leaving only the narrow beam of my flashlight to cut through the inky black. The staircase seemed to stretch on forever, the steps uneven and damp underfoot. I paused for a moment, shining my light around me. The air was different here, heavier, colder, carrying a faint metallic tang. It smelled like rusted iron and decayed wood, the scent sharp enough to sting my nostrils. Then came the sound. At first it was so faint I thought I'd imagined it, the soft, deliberate creak of a step behind me. I whipped around, the flashlight's beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. The staircase stretched upward, empty, the wood gleaming faintly in the pale light. The sound came again, this time louder, closer. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just the sound of an old staircase settling. It was the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy. "Hello?" My voice echoed weakly, swallowed almost immediately by the darkness. No answer came, but the footsteps didn't stop. They were following me now, keeping perfect pace with my movements. I stumbled forward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The flashlight flickered as I descended faster, each step feeling like it might collapse beneath me. No matter how quickly I moved, the footsteps never faltered, always one step behind, as though whatever was following me had no need to rush. The staircase began to feel wrong. The steps were uneven, twisting at unnatural angles, and the wood beneath my feet grew slick and treacherous. The walls on either side, if they could even be called walls, seemed to shimmer like rippling water caught in dim light. Then I realized something far more horrifying. I turned, expecting to see the top of the staircase far above me, but it was gone. The house, the porch, the world I had left behind had vanished completely. The staircase stretched endlessly in both directions, its steps fading into shadow. The footsteps stopped. I was alone in the silence. Or so I thought. I don't know how long I stood there, suspended in the void. The darkness around me felt alive, pressing in like a suffocating shroud. The flashlight in my hand flickered weakly, its pale beam barely cutting through the thick gloom. My breaths were shallow, trembling, as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The staircase stretched endlessly in both directions, its warped planks creaking under my weight. The realization struck like a blow to the chest. I was no longer in the house, no longer in the world I knew. The air was too still, too cold, and carried with it a strange, low hum, almost imperceptible, like the murmuring of a distant crowd. And yet, I was alone. "Is anyone there?" My voice cracked, echoing faintly into the void. For a moment there was silence. Then the staircase groaned beneath me, as though something massive had shifted. The hum grew louder, resolving into whispers, soft, indistinct voices that seemed to rise from the very wood of the steps. They overlapped and tangled together, forming a cacophony of murmurs I couldn't understand. I shone my flashlight down the stairs, my trembling hand barely able to keep the beam steady. The light fell on something strange. The shadows at the edges of the staircase were moving. They writhed and curled, coalescing into shapes that dissolved as soon as I focused on them. My gut twisted with unease. "Go back!" The words came suddenly, sharp and clear, cutting through the whispers like a knife. I whipped around, but there was no one there. The voice had been soft, almost pleading, but the desperation in it was unmistakable. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice rising. The silence returned, heavier now, as if the darkness was holding its breath. The wooden planks beneath my feet groaned again, this time louder, as though under immense pressure. And then, faintly at first, the footsteps returned. They were slower this time, deliberate and measured, each step accompanied by a low, resonant creak. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam seemed to falter, swallowed by the oppressive blackness. My chest tightened as the footsteps grew louder, closer, though nothing was visible. And then I felt it. It wasn't something tangible, not something I could see or touch, but I knew it was there. A presence, vast and cold, loomed behind me, its weight pressing against my back like a chilling wind. My muscles locked, my breath catching in my throat as the whispers rose to a fever pitch. "Go back," the voice repeated, firmer now, almost angry. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling as I directed it up the staircase. For a fleeting moment I saw something, a shadow that wasn't just a shadow, It was tall and twisted, its edges fraying like smoke, and its face. I couldn't describe it. It was more a void than a face, a blank expanse that seemed to drink in the light. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing. My flashlight fell from my hand, clattering down the stairs, its beam spinning wildly before extinguishing altogether. I was plunged into total darkness. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rising hum. The air grew colder still, biting into my skin as the presence loomed closer. I scrambled blindly, my hands grasping for the railing, but it felt slick and wrong, as though the wood was pulsing faintly under my fingers. I don't know how I managed it, but I forced myself to move. Step by step, I began to climb, desperate to escape the oppressive weight behind me. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, the words incomprehensible but filled with anger and sorrow. And yet, even as I ascended, the staircase didn't end. No matter how many steps I took, the void stretched endlessly ahead. It wasn't just a staircase. It was a trap. Panic surged through me as I climbed, my breath ragged and chest heaving. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the very staircase was conspiring against me. The whispers swirled around me, growing louder, and I realized they weren't just random murmurs. They were names. My name. The voices chanted it now, over and over, overlapping into a frantic crescendo that made my head pound. Each syllable dripped with malice, like a curse etched into the air. My legs burned and my vision swam with spots of black and red. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Then the staircase shifted. The wood beneath me twisted violently, the planks splitting and groaning like a living thing. I lost my balance, tumbling forward and slamming onto my hands and knees. Pain flared through me as splinters bit into my palms. The staircase was shaking now, each shudder sending a deep, resonant boom through the void. "Enough!" a voice roared, shattering the cacophony of whispers. I froze. The voice was deep and commanding, reverberating through the space like a physical force. Slowly, I raised my head. Ahead of me, the void rippled and a figure emerged. It wasn't like the shadow I'd seen before. This was solid, almost human, but wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Its body was too long, its limbs too thin, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, glowed faintly, pools of dim, flickering light. "You were warned," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "The staircase binds those who seek its end." "What do you want from me?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head further, regarding me with something like curiosity or pity. "It isn't about what I want. It's about what you have brought with you." I didn't understand, but before I could speak, the staircase lurched again, and the figure was gone. The air around me seemed to collapse, rushing inward like a vacuum, and I realized too late that the staircase was pulling me down. The steps twisted into a spiral, the void narrowing into a tunnel of shadows and distorted whispers. I screamed, grasping for the railing, but it dissolved under my fingers. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the photograph, tumbling through the air, its image burned into my mind. The staircase had claimed me. I awoke with a start, though the darkness around me was unchanged. My body ached, as if I'd been battered by unseen waves, and my throat burned with the remnants of a scream. The staircase was silent now, its oppressive groans and whispers replaced by an eerie stillness. For a fleeting moment I thought I might be free, that the horrors had ended. Then I opened my eyes. The void was no longer infinite. The staircase, once stretching endlessly in both directions, had shifted into something worse. The planks spiraled downward into a narrow, suffocating tunnel. The air felt thicker here, dense with the scent of rot and damp wood, and each breath came with difficulty, as though the atmosphere itself was alive, pressing against my lungs. I stood unsteadily, gripping the railing, which was warm now, pulsing faintly beneath my fingers like a weak heartbeat. The sensation sent a shudder through me, but I didn't let go. It was the only thing grounding me in this nightmare. I had to keep moving. Staying still felt like inviting whatever lurked in the shadows to reach me. The first step down was agonizing, the wood beneath my foot sticky and yielding, as though it was reluctant to let me go. With every step, the walls of the staircase closed in, narrowing until I had to hunch over to continue. The whispers returned, but they were faint now, like a distant storm, building strength. Then came the scratching. It started softly, like claws skittering over wood, but it grew louder, closer, until it echoed all around me. I whipped my head back and forth, shining the flashlight desperately into the dark, but I saw nothing. Only the endless spiral of the staircase and the oppressive blackness pressing in on all sides. "Stop," I whispered, though I didn't know if I was begging the sound or myself. The scratching turned into scraping, the sound of something sharp and heavy dragging against the wood. A faint light flickered ahead, just beyond the curve of the stairs, and my heart leapt. Against every instinct, I ran toward it, my steps loud and frantic on the warped planks. As I rounded the bend, I froze. The light wasn't salvation. It was a lantern, old and rusted, hanging from a hook embedded in the wall. Beneath it, the staircase ended abruptly, its final planks splintered and jagged, jutting out into a gaping abyss. But that wasn't what stopped me. At the edge of the abyss stood a figure. Its back was to me, hunched and unnatural, its outline blurred like a distorted photograph. Its head tilted slightly as though it had heard my approach, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The figure turned. Its face was blank, a smooth expanse of pale flesh stretched tight over bone, with no features save for a pair of hollow, gaping sockets where its eyes should have been. And yet, I knew it was looking at me. The whispers surged, a deafening roar in my ears, as the figure took a step toward me.